From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Voters go to the polls to choose primary candidates for Michigan's open 35th Senate district next week.
This is a swing district. That seat will really determine, can Governor Gretchen Whitmer fulfill a lot of the bills and promises she's made.
The primary for this special election is Tuesday.
So this is very much a toss-up.
What to know?
But first, a story that is politics-related.
Well, certainly politics adjacent.
In a really surprising move this week, USA Today Company says it's going to take over the Detroit News. The company already owns the Detroit Free Press.
The two papers who have competed against one another for decades on the news and opinion pages. The Detroit News as the conservative editorial voice, the Free Press, the liberal voice. They will continue to publish separately.
But many are asking for how long? And what does this mean for the future of journalism in the state? We turn to Matt Friedman, an expert in the Michigan media industry and co-founder of the PR firm Tanner Friedman, for some answers. Matt, hi.
Hello to Zoe and to Rick. And yeah, this is not what we were expecting to be talking about with media in 2026. We were expecting two completely independent papers. That's what was supposed to happen.
So, Matt, what is the significance of this deal?
We call them newspapers. And I guess at their core, they still are. But they're really more than that. They're digital, comprehensive news organizations. And as much as media has changed in Michigan and everywhere, one thing is still the same. These are still the most influential news organizations in the state. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not like it was 30 years ago when I was working in TV news and I would joke that they were our 35-cent assignment editors because we took our cues from them all day long. It's not like that anymore, but they still carry more influence and set the news agenda more than anybody else does. And they have been competing against each other editorially, but have had a shared business back office for about the last 35 years. It started in the late 80s. And the plan for the year was that they were supposed to go their separate ways from a business perspective. And for a time, we were expecting to have an old-fashioned two-newspaper battle for advertising and for readers. And now that's not going to be the case. They're going to be under one roof, metaphorically or otherwise, in ways that they've never been before.
You could hear this collective sort of gasp from those folks who watch the media and politicians and policy makers when this announcement happened on Monday. But why? Why does it matter?
More places for news is good for everybody. If you're trying to get a message out or you're trying to figure out what the messages are. And so having two daily institutions like this available on our phones at any moment has been really good for news consumers. And it's been good for newsmakers. And the fact that there may be consolidation or contraction here, like there have been in so many industries and in so many places in the media, is a little bit frightening. But the other side to that coin is if there can be some sort of two-brand strategy here. I don't know if that's possible or not, but let's say just for a second here that it is, where we have two not competing news organizations, but complementary news organizations with different strategies and some sort of distinct difference. We're subscribing to both and engaging with both provides value to the communities around the state. That would be great. I don't know if it's possible, but at least on paper it's possible.
So since we're conjuring up scenarios here, what would the business operation like that look like?
Well, we've seen it in radio, in your medium, where let's say, for example, for decades, there might be a news talk station and they might have a rock station and they're owned by the same company and they're in the same building and they share resources and space, but they serve different audiences in different ways. Theoretically, we could see something like that and not a doomsday scenario of one survivor and one goes away. But I'll tell you this. In the scenario that I was looking at the beginning of the year where we thought we were going to have two independent news organizations, there were probably three scenarios there. One, that they would both make it. One, that one of them would make it. And another, which you hate to think about, is that neither of them could make it. And I think in this case, the neither of them making it scenario becomes far less likely, but two independent isn't going to happen either. We're somewhere in the middle.
From a historical perspective, we should note, too, that it's noteworthy. It is unusual for two major daily newspapers in a city the size of Detroit to end up being owned by the same company.
Yeah, and if this were to continue as a two-brand strategy
Right.
or a two-choice option, Detroit would buck every national trend. We would be the exception to every rule. So it's worth keeping that in mind, that not just for a city of this size, but really anything other than New York. If you look at Chicago, yes, there are two there, but they're not equal. If you look at what's happening in LA, where the New York Post now has something trying to go head to head with both the LA Times and the paper in San Francisco, jury's way out there. I mean, then those are the biggest cities in the country. So if we have anything more than one news organization like this, it would be a lot. Can we support it? Well, I think that's a lot of that's up to us. As subscribers, it's also up to advertisers, which means it's beyond anybody's control.
With this new dual ownership arrangement, what are the risks for political accountability?
So right now we have two news organizations that cover politics and government. And they both have bureaus in Lansing, and they both have bureaus to some extent in Washington, D.C. And of course, they cover City of Detroit government and some other places too. And if they were to combine all of that, let's face it, it wouldn't have as many resources as it does now. And that means less investigative reporting, less enterprise reporting, less accountability, and day-to-day fewer places for politicians to get their sound bites out. So this does matter to politics.
And we do have bureaus that are competing.
Yeah, competing on the investigative and enterprise in particular, less so on the day-to-day coverage of business. But that is significant because if you look at where the change tends to come from in how politics works and how government works, it tends to come from investigative reporting.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we also know, Matt, is the fewer number of local reporters on the ground, we believe, has been one of the reasons that there has been a rise of political polarization in the United States, or that so much of journalism feels like it's become nationalized when there aren't local reporters covering local issues like school board races or city council meetings.
Well, think about the scene that we used to see all over Michigan decades ago. You'd walk into a Coney Island in the morning and you'd see a bunch of people having breakfast and sharing the newspaper. They'd all have different sections, but they'd pass it around. They had the same source of information that morning. And we don't see that now. You walk into a restaurant now and everybody's on their phones. I talk to clients all the time about how there's no more mass media, there's personal media. So if this combined news, free press, whatever it ends up being, if they keep them together, if they keep them separate, but if they have heft in terms of their quantity of coverage, they're going to reach more people. And when it comes to coverage about government, that's good for communities.
So, Matt, what are you watching for next? What should we be on the lookout for in the next chapter for these papers after this surprising announcement this week?
I would say pay attention to the names you see attached to stories. And if you start seeing more of them, that's good. If you start seeing fewer of them, then the trend continues. And Detroit and Michigan become like every place else. And the question is, if there are voids, who will fill the void? But I think, at least at the beginning, we need to take these corporate people at their word that they're going to operate both of these news organizations somehow and see what it ends up looking like. I don't want to get into predictions on this. I want to stay optimistic. But in order to stay optimistic, people need to remember they've got to pay for the news one way or another. There is no more classified advertising. There's Facebook Marketplace. Chances are you're not paying for someone to deliver the paper to your doorstep anymore. You're getting it on your phone or somewhere else. It has to get paid for somehow. And if you're not an advertiser, that means buy a subscription.
That is Matt Friedman, co-founder of the PR firm Tanner Friedman, on this stunning announcement this week. USA Today company taking over the Detroit News, the company that already owns the Detroit Free Press. Much to watch for in the coming year. Matt, thank you for the wisdom.
Thank you.
Anytime.
November's election, there is an important primary next week and general election in May that will help determine power in the state Senate. Rick Brewer is news director at WCMU and has been intensively covering Michigan's open 35th Senate District, where voters will decide on primary candidates on Tuesday. Rick, hi.
Good to be with you, Zoe.
So first, remind us, why is there this open seat and this special election happening?
Right. At the beginning of last year, so January 3rd, 2025, then State Senator Kristen McDonald-Rivet, who represented the 35th District, took her seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, so leaving it open. And our Constitution in the state of Michigan simply says that the governor shall call a special election. And it doesn't give any timeline, doesn't give any specific date range in which this election has to be called, so it was pretty much at the discretion of Governor Whitmer. And it took her exactly 238 days to call this election. Yeah. The Republicans really pushed back, calling Whitmer holding on to declaring this special election for purely political reasons. At one point, there was a lawsuit. There were calls from some Democrats, including Attorney General Dana Nessel, saying that, yes, she should call this election. So there was a lot of buildup and a lot of political partisanship, frankly, and some calls within her own party leading up to this 238 days before the special election dates were set, which, as you mentioned, the first primary, February 3rd, general election, May 5th.
What's at stake in Lansing? Why does this special election make a difference?
Because at the end of the day, Rick, it comes down to the fact that the Democrats only have a one-seat majority right now. We currently have 19 Democrats, 18 Republicans in that chamber. And so this is a swing district. That seat will really determine, can Governor Gretchen Whitmer fulfill a lot of the bills and promises she's made over the course of her two administrations, to see those over the finish line. Because, again, very slim majority. And, of course, the House of Representatives is controlled by Republicans. So a lot's at stake, because the tie-breaking vote, if something's slim and it goes to the GOP and we're at a 19-19 split, Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist would be sort of that tie-breaking vote. But, of course, these issues are complex. Michiganders, we're a swing state, so it's not always a guarantee that a Republican's going to vote on a Republican issue, a Democrat's going to vote on a Democratic issue. So the slimmer and slimmer a majority gets, the harder and harder it can become for bills to actually become law.
So, Rick, you mentioned Michigan being a swing state. This 35th Senate District is a real swing district. Tell us about it.
That's right. So there's a big portion of Saginaw County, and I'll quote The Guardian, they called it the swing county in the swing state. A nerdy political fact that I always cite in reporting about Saginaw County is that since 1992, Saginaw County has determined which presidential candidate has won the state of Michigan. So it's over 30 years that county determines who eventually gets our electoral votes for the national election. So this is a very much a high-stakes swing district. We also have the city of Midland, which is included in that, which, for those who might not be aware, that's where former Michigan Attorney General Bill Schuette is from. It's where Congressman John Molinar got his start in the Midland GOP. Ron DeSantis has campaigned there in the past when he was trying to oust Trump for the Republican ticket there a few years ago. So Midland, a big kind of GOP stronghold. And of course we have Bay County, which has gone Democrat recently. So this is a very much a toss-up.
Right. And when you say that Saginaw County determines the winner, it's predictive. As goes Saginaw County, how goes Michigan?
That is exactly right.
Rick, what are the issues that you're hearing from voters and candidates that are defining this primary race?
Yeah, so far I think it's not out of the ordinary that the top issue that you keep hearing about on the campaign trail is the A word, affordability. Cost of living. That's what pretty much every candidate on both sides of the aisle, as well as a libertarian candidate, are talking about on this campaign trail. But to kind of narrow that down to some more specifics, our GOP candidates talking about property tax reform. Can we bring down the state income tax from 4.25% to maybe just 4%, right? Our GOP candidates are, broadly speaking, talking about making a more business-friendly environment. On the Democratic side, though, we are seeing language of trying to stop, quote, MAGA extremism. We're seeing kind of that strong language of interjecting our current national moment into what is a very local race, but we also have seen both sides of the aisle talking about education reform. And as you, Rick Pluta, are aware, Governor Whitmer has made literacy a top issue for her final year in office. So all the candidates are also talking about making education at the top of their list as we have entered this kind of post-COVID learning issues and students in schools, trying to play catch up after the pandemic. That is still an ongoing issue. So we see candidates talking about that. But kind of a hyper-local, kind of Lansing meets local, every story is local angle.
Rick, finally, we should note, because this is a special election, candidates who win the primary next week will go on to the general in May. But then in November, there's the regular election for this seat. It's a lot for this district and voters.
It absolutely is, Zoe. And that's one of the most undercovered things people aren't really aware of, is that the person who ends up winning this seat and is serving in 2027 will have had to win 4 elections in 1 year, which is quite a feat in a very swing district, obviously, because what puts the special in this special election is that they are fulfilling the end of Kristen McDonald-Rivet's term. Right? So you're going to have somebody who wins this primary on February 3rd, and then they have the general
in May.
But in April, they're going to have to apply for the August primary. So as you can imagine, there are all kinds of situations that could happen. Somebody only wins maybe by a few hundred, a few thousand votes in this coming February 3rd primary and says, you know what, I'm going to try to primary them again. And, it could go, any number of scenarios could play out. But at the end of the day, the most important thing for listeners to realize is that the long-term winner who serves the full 4 years of the next term in the 35th district will have to win 4 elections in this calendar year.
But who's counting? That is Rick Brewer. He is news director at WCMU, covering the open 35th Senate District. We are going to link to candidate profiles and everything you need to know about the race that Rick and his team have put together. Just head to michiganpublic.org/itsjustpolitics. Rick, the plan to have you back next Wednesday with results from Tuesday's primary, right?
That's exactly right.
We are looking forward to talking to you then.
We are.
Thank you very much for having me.
And some more reporting from WCMU. That is that the Michigan Democratic Party is accusing a conservative political ad firm of trying to interfere in Tuesday's primary. The firm is called Progressive MI. It is running ads and sending flyers supporting candidate and State Board of Education President Pamela Pugh. Democratic leaders say some of the ads were funded by Majority Strategies, an ad firm they say has worked with Republicans before. In a press call, they say that the ads are an attempt by a conservative group to influence voters, meddle, basically, in the competitive Democratic primary on Tuesday. The Democrats' message is stay out and let Democrats decide who their candidate will be, free from interference and misinformation. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.